good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in today's Africa. Hope you are all enjoying your Saturday. We have a nice sunny Saturday morning here in Toronto. Those who are used to tune in, thank you very much for your fidelity. Those who is their first time, warm welcome and thank you very much for tuning in. And we really appreciate to have you on board today. Without you, all of you, you won't be able to express our passion, dedication to our dear mother Africa. So I have my friend, a brother, Phil, who is our producer, who is working hard behind the scene and during the program. Thank you, brother Phil.
Thank you, Dr.
Um,
Diallo.
our topic today, rethinking social justice in Africa. Rethinking social justice in Africa. It is an important topic. Rethinking social justice in Africa. Three key set of words: social justice, Africa, rethinking. Let's do some kind of circling around these three expressions before we dive into the topic. Social justice. Why talking about social justice specifically in Africa? Why rethinking it specifically in Africa? Social justice is a concept that pertains to fairness, equality, and equitable distribution of resources, opportunities, and privileges within a society. So achieving social justice is important in every region of the world, including Africa, and for several reasons. First of all, we have historical injustice. We have economic disparities. When I talk historical injustice, many African countries, or even maybe all of them, most of them, or all of them, have a history of colonization, slavery, and exploitation, which has left a legacy of deep-seated inequalities and social injustice in our society in Africa. So we have economic, as I said, economic disparities, uh, access to education, healthcare access, gender inequality, land and resource right, because we have unequal resource distribution who has led for social and economic injustice. We have political injustices, political power imbalance, corruption, lack of transparency can hinder the equitable distribution of resources and opportunity. Access to justice. Many African citizens, especially marginalized groups, lack access to a fair and efficient justice system. As I said, also economic development. To pursue the pursuit of social justice in Africa is essential for addressing all these, circle injustice, reducing disparities, etc. So today, to help us go through our topic today, we have the privilege to welcome the perfect guest for our today's topic, who is none other than Dr. Bernardine Akonghai, President, CEO, Coalition for Social Justice USA, originally from Nigeria. Is she not the perfect guest for our topic today? Obviously, yes. Good day, Dr. Akonghai, and welcome. Forgive me if I mispronounce your family name.
That's okay.
We are extremely grateful to have you in our program today.
Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure of mine and my co-host, my producer. Who is Dr. Akonghai?
Thank you, Dr. Diallo. Thank you very much for inviting me. I feel humbled and pleased to be here. I'm glad to be with you and all your listeners around the world today. My name is, as you said, is Dr. Bernadine Ahokai, originally from Cross River State, Calabar in Cross River State, Nigeria. I'm a Nigerian American, and I currently reside in Pennsylvania in the USA. It's still morning here in the US. It's 11:05, so good morning to all of you out there. And as I said earlier on, I'm pleased to be here to discuss this issue, this subject, social justice, that is near and dear to my heart. I am the founder of Coalition for Racial Equity and Social Justice in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. And that's the issue we're trying to put out there and advocate for equity and social justice in our communities in Pennsylvania and beyond our borders. So thank you very much for having me this morning.
Thank you, Doctor. So the first question I will ask you is to provide an overview of the goals and mission of the Coalition for Social Justice in the USA. You know, I say in the USA, and its connection to African social justice issues, when I say how their goals and mission relate to social justice in Africa, being in USA.
Thank you.
What motivates your organization to focus on social justice issues in Africa? And what specific project or initiatives are you currently involved in our continent? And also, how do you define social justice, particularly in the context of Africa, and why, in your own words, it is important to rethink it?
Thank you very much, Dr. Diallo, for that very important question. Actually, Dr. Diallo, you had laid the foundation in your earlier presentation about social justice, which is inequality, injustice that affects mostly marginalized communities in any nation. We find that very much in the US, which is a country that has so much wealth. We also have it on the continent of Africa. As you stated in your earlier presentation, some people believe that in Africa, especially, the social injustice and inequality is the legacy of colonization. But our colonial, quote and unquote, masters have left our continent many, many years ago, and we're still having imbalance of power imbalance, economic disparity, and inequity and injustice in all the sectors of our country. We have it in education, we have it in health, we have it in gender inequality, we have it in transportation. We have it everywhere. So this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, not only here in the US, but also in Africa, especially in my birth country, Nigeria, where I travel to every summer for about 6 weeks. And I see the disparity, the poverty that is so extreme and getting worse every year I go into the country. It's really heartbreaking and troubling to me. For instance, take for instance education, where many of the children are being educated in dilapidated buildings, even in the townships and cities in my home country, Nigeria. And when you move away from the towns and cities and go into the villages, we don't call them suburbs, in the villages, and it's even worse. There's leaking roofs. We know in Africa, 6 months of the year is a rainy season, and the classrooms are filled with water from leaking roofs. Even as the poor parents are struggling to pay school fees, that even expected to provide desks and chairs for their children. You go into some classrooms, children sitting on the floor or standing because their parents couldn't afford the desk and chair. And there's one of the schools in my hometown that my younger sister is the principal of. I had to give money for 100 desks and chairs a few years back, so that children in that school could have desks and chairs to sit on during classes. So we have that in this disparity, and we know that education is a way to alleviate poverty in a country. And yet these children are, getting substandard education, and that would not give them an edge to, in a global economy. So that's one area, as an educator myself, that I feel very disheartened about. When I travel to Nigeria, I see such injustice, such social injustice and inequality. Where those children are being denied of a good educational experience. That's one. There's other issues that, as we go along, I'll also mention. For instance, there's issue that's formal education. There's also issue of informal education. It is said that Africa has the highest informal employed women in the world. In Africa, 84% of women are in informal employment, and 63 of men compared to 63 men. And those women out there in the markets, if you go to any African market, you see teeming with women and young girls, even young girls who should be in school, that are out selling with their mothers. And there's no protection for these women in the marketplace. So that's another area of social injustice that I see in Africa, in our country, in Africa. And, there's because those informal employed women face insecurity in the marketplace. There's, it's a question of human rights violation for them also. There's other issues I see as I travel into the country, which I bring up. I don't know if I've addressed your question or if you have more, but one of the things that I'm doing is working with some schools in my home country. When I go in, sometimes before I travel, I ship educational supplies, because that's also lacking. And in fact, from my knowledge, most of the social injustice and inequality is because of corruption in our country. Africa is a very wealthy continent, but unfortunately, the money goes into a few hands, are corrupt leaders, and doesn't trickle down to do justice to the general population. So when I travel to Nigeria, sometimes I ship educational supplies to some schools. Specifically, my aunt has a comprehensive school from preschool to high school, and I take those materials, to the schools when I travel in.
Thank you, Doctor. And you're absolutely right. And actually, you talk about the political injustice, which is very, very, as I said in my introduction, political power imbalance, corruption, lack of transparency. And also, I believe rethinking the social justice in Africa is very important, just also because of the changing demographic. Africa's population is one of the fastest growing in the world. So rethinking social injustice is necessary to ensure that the needs and rights of the growing population, particularly youth, are adequately addressed. Brother Theo, what do you have to add in what just Dr. Akonghai said?
Good morning, Dr. Halka. We are so glad that you are with us today, thinking about relevant issues that affects Mother Africa. And this is the place in the village where we can sit back and then talk about it. My question to you before we get into it is, what made you go into forming a coalition for social justice?
Thank you very much. That's such an important question. And I get asked that quite a lot because I retired just before COVID a few years ago. Then came 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, which I know both of you are not in America, but it was, there was a reaction globally to such a murder. So I was so traumatized by that murder. I have a young professional adult son and 2 grandsons, and I'm placing myself in the family of George Floyd. It could happen to any Black mother in this country. So when I recovered from my shock and traumatization from that murder, I decided I needed to do something and use my educational background to do something about social injustice in this country. And what was that? Something that's the Coalition for Justice and Racial Equity organization is the result of that. I formed that organization in June 2020, exactly a month after the murder of George Floyd, to create a safe space to bring our community together to engage in authentic conversations about racism, racial discrimination, inequity, and injustice in our country. And of course, our program is now impacting people beyond our borders, beyond Pennsylvania, beyond US, internationally also. In addition to providing educational, a safe space for adults to come together and engage, we invite people to also share their personal stories of injustice and inequity. I also developed a youth program to educate our youth about the history of this country, which unfortunately many of our politicians do not want our students to learn about, because understanding the history helps one understand the legacy of enslavement, racial discrimination, and racism. So we're doing that. We're providing that. Our program is called Youth Build Diversity Ambassador Leadership Program, which we provide to our public school students in the middle school. So that's the reason, my motivation for forming the Organization for Racial Equity and Social Justice was based on that murder of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Doctor. And actually talk about diversity. So my question is, many African countries have diverse cultural, ethnic, and religious background. How can social justice initiative be inclusive and respectful of this diversity?
Thank you for asking also. Yes, we do have, even in the US, we have diverse, that's why, we're trying to educate people about our diversity. In Africa, we have diverse people from diverse backgrounds, ethnic and religious. There's need for us, to come together and work together. There's issue that's happening in the Middle East with Hamas and the Israelites. Actually, in South Africa, even though apartheid was dismantled, but South Africa is known to be the worst country in terms of social justice and inequality. So I think there's a need to educate people about the importance of human rights, social justice, and equality. It's going to be a big challenge in Africa, especially because, as you said in your opening statement, Dr. Diallo, the legacy of colonization is very, very strong. The Western powers that colonized Africa laid the foundation of by impacting on people the division amongst the Africans. So, for instance, Nigeria, for instance, was thrown together. It was a very bad marriage in terms of how Nigeria was put together. The Western powers did not even know the geography of the African nation when they decided, when they came to colonize the country and then divide and rule the nation, the continent, and put the countries together. So that creates this huge issue of rivalry. We have violence. We have individual and displaced people in most of African countries because of ethnic rivalry that was the foundation of which was laid by our colonial masters. So that's a huge issue that our leaders need to embrace and do something about. Unfortunately, because most of the African leaders are so self-centered and there's corruption in the mix with a capital C, they're not paying attention to resolve some of these lingering issues on the African continent.
Thank you, Doctor. So may you just elaborate a little bit elaborate on what specific initiatives or project has your organization undertaken to promote social justice in Africa, and what impact have they had? And I believe I believe also, being in USA, far from Africa, I'm sure you are your organization collaborate with local people and organizations in Africa to affect change. And what have been the outcome of these partnerships?
Thank you for asking. One of the things, not necessarily using the coalition of justice here, that I try to do in my home birth country, Nigeria, especially my home state, Cross River State, is to work with some of our leaders. I meet with them when I'm in Nigeria for about 5 to 6 weeks, and bring up the issue of social inequality and injustice in my states, the schools especially, because of my educational background. And I meet with the people, the people in power in my home states to address some of the issues surrounding education. For instance, lack of educational supplies in the schools, lack of infrastructure or poor infrastructure, lack of, I mentioned the desks and chairs, and the states of the school buildings in the states. So I do have meetings with some of the organizations there, and the education department leaders to process with them about that. The point is that in some cases, money is allocated for some of those works, but a chunk of the money goes down the drain through corruption. So and there's not there hasn't been an effective way of overseeing the money that's being allocated to do some of those work in the schools. So it is a huge problem. Almost everyone is said to be corrupt. So that's become a very big problem to address some of those issues. But, we still bring it to the attention. On my last trip in July, August, I did, meet with the new governor of my state and to talk to him about some of my concerns about the education of children in the states. and he said, he made notes and would, look into it as he settles into his new governorship position.
Thank you, Doctor. Dear listener, you are watching the program. Today is Africa. Our topics today, Rethinking Social Justice with Dr. Bernardine Honghai. Brother Theo, you heard what Dr. Honghai said. So what's your take on?
This is a very important topic. We've been going at it for some time now. And in Africa, if I can put it within a context that I'm going to be basing my statement on, if you take people in the rural areas and the people in the urban areas, their needs are different. Mm-hmm. You see, in the rural areas, maybe, I'm going to say maybe, they may lack roads, good water, pipe-borne water to drink. That may be the only thing that they may need. But then our leaders don't look at it that way. They look at a point where they live, and they always forget that at some point in time, in Africa, we go back home for Christmas, for funerals, and for outdoorings, and for everything. They forget that it's the same road that they would use to go back there. So, in my estimation, what do you think, or how can we change this kind of mentality to our leaders? Because I always say that we elect leaders from among us. Why is this not being addressed? Because it borders on human rights violations.
It does.
So how can we effect changes for this social injustice to be corrected?
Thank you. That's it. That's a big question. That's a very good question. How can we effect change? I think, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I think there needs to be a collaboration, a working together between the public sector and our private sectors. Yes, it is true. Actually, the infrastructure, the roads and transportation in our countries in Africa are so deplorable. And unfortunately, the leaders themselves, through public funds, equip themselves with all these hillocks and what have you, big vehicles that can travel the bad roads, unlike the ordinary person, the general population. I've seen on WhatsApp images, I've seen firsthand too when I traveled to Nigeria, roads that are completely eroded. In my home state, we have tropical rainfall. It's still raining, I'm told, this week in my home state in Calabar, and the erosion is unbelievable. But those public officials and politicians drive in their heavy vehicles, hillocks, through those roads to their villages if they go. Some of them have homes, big homes in their villages, when everybody surrounding them is, in abject poverty. I think there needs to be collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, working together to solve some of these human rights issues in education, in healthcare, in roads and transportation. And somebody, they need to be that, collaboration and working together. Hopefully we'll see that, sometime soon, because what I see also in terms of social inequality and social injustice is that a private sector do not invest in the future of our country. They do not put up money and to address some of these issues. Unfortunately, I don't believe, even like in my home, I refer to Nigeria a lot because I'm familiar with the situation on the ground there. I don't I haven't heard of any business that provides scholarships to students to go to school or provide funds to repair the school buildings or provide funds to pay for desks and chairs for students in school. They need to be that. They need a private sector which saps money out of our public funds by working with our corrupt politicians, need to give back to our communities. So there needs to be that collaboration between the private sector and the public sector in addressing these many human rights issues that we have in Africa.
In essence, if I can get it, it means there's no accountability.
Absolutely not.
It's problematic, Doctor.
There's no oversight.
Yes, yeah, it's problem, especially for that you are abroad, far from, and I believe the problem is the democratic governance. We need to make sure the democratic governance is inclusive and transparent. It's an important aspect of social justice. So rethinking social justice involves strengthening the democratic institutions and processes to ensure that they work for all citizens. It's not easy to achieve, but what are you doing are you using what you are doing to make sure there is some kind of awareness in terms of democratic governance?
Thank you for asking. I want to pick on the term democratic governance. I don't believe there's anything like democratic governance in Africa. It's leaning more towards authoritarian than democratic. And unfortunately, the general population is not well educated about what democracy looks like. And frankly, when I challenge some of our public officials in Nigeria, I'm told that even they kick back by telling me that even in America, where I live, I reside, and I'm a citizen, there's nothing like democracy. so that's the typical response to me. Because if you look at the government, even in Nigeria, it's heavily populated by males. Mm-hmm. There's gender inequality there, and that's another aspect of social injustice. So actually, just last week, I attended the World Summit on Women and Girls, which is a UN event. And I met for the first time a female president, Dr. Amina Garrick, president of Mauritius. So I was really, really impressed. And she's a very smart woman too. So there's, gender inequality in our country. There's when you think about the elections, how those male chauvinists unfortunately are elected and put in power. There's so much also corruption in the voting arena, because with rigging of votes and what have you. So there's a lot of issue involved, and most of the general population, because of the extreme poverty, they're being bribed with bags of rice, beans, and what have you, and then they vote through their votes for the wrong individuals who continue to embezzle money from the government rather than address those issues in education, healthcare, roads, infrastructure, transportation, and economic inequality in the country. and thereby keeping the people poorer, the general population poorer and poorer, while the politicians and government officials are, richer and richer every day. So I think, as I said earlier on, there's need for a 90 degrees turnaround to embrace true democracy, irrespective of what they think is happening here in America, and in order to build a sustainable socio-economic growth and alienate poverty on the continent.
Thank you, Doctor. And you talk about gender inequality, and gender-based inequalities are prevalent in many African societies. We all know that, with women and girls often facing discrimination, limited opportunity, even sometimes violence. So in your organization, what are you doing to address, what initiatives are you doing to address and redress gender inequalities in Africa?
Thank you. I'm a mother of 3 daughters, and I always believe, actually, I grew up with my late father always telling me when I was younger that the sky was the limit for me, and that's why I am where I am today. And I relate that to my daughters too when they were growing up, that what a boy can do, a girl can do also. And I have my 3 daughters. My oldest daughter is an attorney in corporate America. Her sister is a medical doctor, associate professor at Harvard Medical School, and infectious disease specialist. And my 3rd daughter is a researcher at an Ivy League school, University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. So I'm very, very, very opposed to gender inequality. And I try to speak up about it wherever I have the opportunity, just as I'm doing now. We're in the Coalition for Justice. I have brought a couple of females to present, to speak, to tell their stories about growing up and where they are today. I have one of my young presenter who was a daughter of a Nigerian immigrant, born and raised here, who's now a medical doctor like her mom. So when I go into Nigeria also, I impress that upon the people I work with down there, within my family and outside of my family, in the state as a whole, about encouraging young girls. I feel very distressed because I see many of the young girls on the streets hawking wares for their families instead of being in school during the day. And, I did raise this topic with our leading officials in my states, that it's really disheartening. Those girls need to be in school. We had a young girl in Malala who was being almost killed in her home country for going to school as a young girl, and she got but she fought, and her parents, I was thankful to her parents who encouraged her to do that. So I think I do believe that every child, boy or girl, should be given the opportunity, the equal opportunity to thrive and excel. Even in America, this is what the Coalition for Justice has been advocating about, to make sure that every child, no matter the color of their skin or their religious or ethnic background, should be given the equal opportunity to thrive in school and excel to the best of their God-given abilities.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. Thank you. And I'm glad to talk about education, because education is often considered as a fundamental tool for achieving social justice.
It is.
And education, and there is a role, for education. There is education. We need awareness in order to rethink social justice in Africa. So, what concrete strategies does your organization use to raise awareness and educate the public in terms of education?
Thank you for asking. Actually, you've already said that education is the fundamental tool to alleviate poverty and to eliminate social inequity and injustice and economic disparity. People need to, we need to create awareness in the public. We need to educate people about this issue, and without, you don't know what you don't know. So I have people, even when we have speaker series on this racial inequity and social injustice issues, who say, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was still happening. For instance, when Obama was elected president years ago, everybody went back home and thought, oh, racism has been eliminated in America. Now we know it hasn't been eliminated. So education is the key. We have to, as they say, sometimes, not sometimes, you have to keep hammering the issue and putting it out there 1,001 times or more to be able to sink in to people, about this issue. Currently, actually, here in the US, I got a group together to look into a crisis that is deepening in America, a wealthy country, in all the states, including Pennsylvania, and in my county, Montgomery County, is homelessness. We have hundreds of unhoused people, families, and children who do not have a legal and safe roof over their heads to sleep at night, who are sleeping on the streets, in their cars, in the pitching tents in the woods. So all this is through education, creating awareness and creating public will to address these social injustice and issues that surrounds us all.
Thank you, Doctor. You talk about President Obama. Are you getting, or do you get support from the Americans?
We do. I do get. Yes, we do. We have, in fact, for instance, our adult education programs. We have 2 monthly. We do use the Eventbrite platform for our speaker series, and the data we receive from Eventbrite platform that people are being very receptive about the education we're providing through the series, and people are transforming their attitudes and behaviors towards the other, and that leads to discrimination, prejudice, and racial discrimination and racism. So I think I'm really pleased about that, because that's our mission and our goal, to be able to create a safe space for people to come and learn about the legacy of enslavement of Black people in this country, and which is still happening, which is firmly embedded in our DNA, in American DNA, and all the fabric of these sectors in the United States. So, we're giving people this education that they didn't receive in school, and it's in the hope that it's transforming their attitudes and behaviors for the better. And we're getting the report from a platform that we're succeeding in what we're doing. So I'm really pleased about that, and we'll continue to do that for as long as we can.
Yeah, but you are talking about education. You are talking about in USA, right? But how does it impact in Africa?
In Africa, it has to be through education too. A general population not up to snuff about some of these things. In fact, I've seen a report that says Nigerians are the happiest people on earth. But there's so much stark poverty in Nigeria, it is not funny. But I know we have a very pleasant disposition, but people are suffering. People, the Nigerians are suffering. You see that once you get off the plane and get into even the townships, and then you go into the rural areas, it's worse. So people, and there's a lot of wealth in Nigeria, but the wealth is circulating amongst the 1% of Nigerians, when 99% of Nigerians live in abject poverty. So I think there needs to be education about this type of disparity, and the people need to be. I'm not asking to create a situation where people go revolt and destroy things, but people need to be well informed and educated about such injustice that surrounds them, that's keeping them poor and keeping them not thriving, and their children, because it is a serious human rights situation. Everybody should have the right to thrive, and not just 1% of the population of the country.
Thank you, Doctor. You're absolutely right. Brother Theo, I'm sure you have something to add. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Jallo. I'm enjoying this conversation. We know that social justice means everyone's human rights are protected, respected, and promoted. Everyone has access to equal opportunities and the resources necessary, just like you said, to thrive. And it doesn't guarantee a perfect society where everyone is always happy. However, everyone will have a fighting chance at the life they want. And having said this, do you think African societies, a time has come for African societies to mobilize resources, both human and everything, just like the Coalition for Social Justice, to put pressure on governments? Because if we look at it, the lack of education, where politicians use illiteracy to rob the people. They use illiteracy to rob the people. Do you think a time will come, or a time has come, for institutions to be pressurized? Institutions like yours and other institutions in Africa, I think there might be some of them back there in Africa. But then, unless the person who is leading the organization is not corrupt, they could be corrupted, where the government is under pressure. They can just say, you know what, hold on, don't say anything. We just grease your palms, as it happens in most African countries. Do you think a time will come, or a time has come, that pressure groups should have to come to terms that everything has been done, governments are not listening, our leaders are not listening, so we have to take matters in terms of going through the judiciary to have this addressed?
Thank you for saying that. I'm just shaking my head when you mentioned judiciary, because just yesterday I had a message in my inbox about one of our judges, federal judges, resigning and stepping down because of some of these issues that we're just talking about, injustice. Our judiciary system is as corrupt as any other system. So I don't know. I'm still hopeful that there's a way out, but I don't know the way our judicial system is operating currently, whether that's an avenue to seek social justice for our people. But I do believe that with education, that they need to be. I know I talk to some people when I go to Nigeria, even in my home state, we had a very corrupt governor, previous governor, very corrupt. And people are typically afraid to speak up because of repercussion, even might result in death. So I think that's what is keeping most Africans from tackling this issue in their midst. This big elephant called corruption that undermines social inequality and social justice on a continent. So until somebody or some group of people are brave enough to challenge the status quo, to get rid of corrupt politicians and government officials, that I think until that time comes, we'll all, will still be saddled with this issue on the continent. Because as I said, people are afraid. There was a journalist, actually, Menendez, which is an American legislator in New Jersey, because that journalist trained in New Jersey, and actually I think his wife and children were still in New Jersey when he did some research and published some articles about a corrupt head of states in Nigeria. He was arrested and jailed because of the article he wrote in the paper. And this was my former governor, which I know personally about, some of the things he did and how corrupt he was, and embezzled this money that was, given to use in administering the state. He, arrested this journalist and jailed him. They had to, there was pressure, through the office of Menendez in New Jersey here, to the federal government, to the state government, to release this journalist from prison. So that's the situation that we face in Africa, unlike the Western world, where people can speak up, write anything. In fact, the group I formed on the issue of homelessness in Montgomery County were preparing an op-ed that will be publishing by next week. Nobody's going to come to arrest us for criticizing our county commissioners for not, providing shelter for our homeless. But it happens very much in Africa.
Because we accept whatever politicians tell us. Exactly. And again, we become complicit with that, because the person who is giving the bribe and the person who is taking it are all guilty. So I think it's a very touchy and a very difficult kind of subject, because it all borders on human rights. And if human rights are violated, because a person's human rights are violated, it results in consequences. But then, if we can trust the judiciary, we can't trust the politicians, we can't trust the leaders. And the question is, who are the leaders? The leaders were selected from among us. So if we can't trust ourselves, then where are we heading to, Dr. Ongai?
Yes, and not only that, Brother Theo, the main problem, first of all, is access to the justice system. Okay. Because many African citizens, especially marginalized group, lack access to a fair and efficient justice system. Okay. So I believe social justice includes efforts to improve, first of all, access to legal services, which is lacking, and also to make sure the legal system is fair and impartial which is almost, impossible for the time being in Africa. Now, in being in USA and with your organization, what you are doing to address and try to improve that aspect in Africa, not in US, but in Africa.
Thank you for asking. In Africa, it's to address it in my home birth country and my home state is to continue to engage them in authentic conversations about these issues. I talk to them frequently from here too, and when I travel in there, I meet with them in person and talk to them about it. It's going to take time. It's not something that can be resolved overnight. Surprisingly, too, most of those leaders were trained outside of, many of them were trained in the US. So they know what to do, but it seems as if once they get back home, they get caught up in the corrupt system, and then they forget what transpires here. Not that there's no corruption here in the Western world, but not to the extent that it's happening on our continent. But I think it's continued engagement. We can't just look the other way. I'm one who speak up wherever I am. I'm not afraid to speak up. I don't need anything from anyone. They're not responsible for they weren't responsible for my education. They didn't buy the ticket for me to travel in and out of Nigeria, and they don't feed me when I'm there. So I can say it as it is, as I see it. So I engage them in these authentic, meaningful conversations and hope that eventually it will sink. Hope that eventually some of them will, organize themselves. I even talked to them. There's some issues. For instance, there's a current issue in my home state about the Obongshi, which is the traditional ruler of the Efik people. Efik. And many of our leaders are not happy about what's happening, but they're not willing to speak up in public. So I think because they're getting kickbacks from this here and there and here and there, I think, everything revolves around poverty. And when people, and unfortunately, some of those people are in a position where they are, they don't, I don't know why they think they need to collect crumbs from tables of leaders and be afraid to speak up when they see enormities happening amongst them. But eventually, I hope that some of our leaders will be able to band together and speak up and do something about some of this, and they themselves too will not be looking for crumbs from the table of political leaders. Once they divorce themselves from that kind of relationship, they'll be able to speak up, and hopefully too they won't be afraid, even if they have to go to prison. Our previous leaders like Obafemi Awolowo went to prison, for, daring and speaking up. So I don't know why it's so difficult in the current leaders that they're afraid to speak up against injustice, which is so much, which is causing our people to remain poor. And I feel really distressed about that.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Honkai. The political system, the way they govern, affects tremendously all aspects in Africa in the negative way. And I think social justice, it's why it's an important topic we need to address. Brother Theo, I'm sure you have something to say.
Yes, very interesting indeed. Dr. Honkai said something that resonates with me. You see, the fact of the matter is that, people have not been held accountable. Yes, if we compare the leaders, I would say the patriots, the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Azikiwes, the Awolowos, the Kenyattas, and all those patriots, those who started the African Revolution, anytime they spoke out, they were eliminated. But under their regimes, they were, if you come to look at almost all of them, none of them died or was overthrown. And somebody said, okay, you know what? He had $10 million or something that in their outside of the countries. They were Africans to the bone. But in today's leadership, is the me, myself, and I, and my family and friends, whether they are qualified for positions of that, because they brought me to power, I don't care what they can do. Whether, if I give them this position, are they doing it? And let me address also the gender inequalities in terms of how women are put in certain responsible positions. Women are not allowed, or they are not appointed to the defense ministry. They are always appointed either child and welfare or ministry. I wouldn't say even education. Some they create certain positions for women, which to me personally is also not right. Because if you want social justice, you have to look at people with their qualification as to whether they can do the job. But there's a vast difference between Africa of old and Africa today. So, Dr. Hoka, I think you're doing a very great job bringing awareness. And so we have to rethink of about the way forward, because Africa has got the potential. I have not given up on Africa at all. We are just beginning to start, because we see what is going on in Africa right now. The African revolution is ongoing right now, because we live in a multipolar world right now. Nobody can question that. So we have to be able to bring pressure to bear on our leaders to consider ensuring that social justice is supreme in everything that they do. That's what I can say. Thank you, Doctor, for sharing your space and time with us. Dr. Jallo?
Thank you, Brother Theo, and you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. And Dr. Akonghai, looking ahead, what are your organization's long-term goals and vision for social justice in Africa? And how can African individuals, even non-African individuals, and other organizations contribute to these efforts?
Thank you for asking that question, Dr. Diallo. I think long-term looking forward, I do compliment you, both of you, for what you're doing. We need to get the word out like this and educate African people in general. I hope a lot of them are listening to your programs about the issue of social injustice and inequality in Africa. We need to encourage in each of our home countries, Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, wherever, all the African countries, whoever is listening, seek out the groups, some NGOs. We have a lot of NGOs there, although many of the NGOs are in there for what they can get out of the public funds. But if we can get hold of some good NGOs who can come together and work on this issue. You had mentioned, Dr. Diallo, about oversight. There needs to be oversight and accountability from our leaders about what they're doing. And so if those organizations need to come together as an oversight for some of the things that is going on in our education sector, in our healthcare sector, transportation, and what have you, because of the serious corruption that is preventing the country from developing, and the people from getting out of poverty. So I'm hoping that in fact, now that I've had this session with you on my next trip this next summer to Nigeria, I know of a few NGOs. I will, have some really serious conversations with them about looking into this. It's not an easy task because of the how corruption is so rampant. It's part of DNA out there. So it's going to be a very difficult task, but it's something that needs to be broached with some of those NGOs and see if they have the public will to address it and not shy away from it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akonghai. I believe we cannot address all the issues in 1 hour and something. We'll have you back for sure to continue this discussion, this important and interesting discussion. Thank you very much. May peace, mercy, and blessings of the Almighty God be upon you and continue to give you the strength and the vision to fulfill your noble mission. Thank you, Brother Theo. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in today. See you next week, same platform, same time. Bye now.